Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and I am joined by a special guest tonight on just about as late notice as you could possibly give a person to come on a program. John Sheeran from Cincy Jungle and SB Nation joins us. John, you've been on the program once before. We're glad to have you back. I think the last time you were on was right before the draft. So how have things been going? How was your fourth, first of all?
Fourth was good. I got into a pool, and I know some of my friends were jealous because of that, because I beat the Heat with that. So that was good. They ate some good food. Didn't really see a lot of fireworks. I think just watching or going on Twitter last night, I think I've entered like old man Twitter, like on like fireworks suck and stuff like that, the noise and stuff. So I hope I'm not getting to that age where I don't like fireworks. I want to keep that part of my youth as long as I can. But the fourth is good. How was your fourth?
It was good. Thanks for asking. Kind of did a lot of different things, but it was good. I got to go to the beach for a handful of hours, which was awesome. And you may or may not know that I have a little guy. He's about 16 months now. So I guess I'm part of quote unquote old man Twitter because I didn't get to watch. I didn't really get to watch fireworks last night. The little guy crashed out early, and so we were just kind of hanging and didn't really go anywhere special to go view them. So I guess I'm a little bit in that boat. And we have a little question of the night. We sometimes do this. Usually they're pretty fun. So since you mentioned food, John, and we are dudes on this program and we like our food, the question I put out to our Twitter account earlier today was basically your go-to July 4th food. And the options I had were burgers, some sort of hot dogs, brats, sausages, chili, or some other type of grub that maybe you got something special. I'll give you an update real quick. 43% says burgers is the go-to. 51% has hot dogs, brats, sausages. Only 3% is kind of a little surprising from Bengals fans, say chili, because chili is such a big deal in Cincinnati. And 3% have other. So do you have a thought, sir, on your go-to grub? Or do you just kind of hey, it's a holiday, I'm eating what's in front of me?
I voted in this poll as part of the 42%.
Okay. Nice.
But I am interested in the 3% who voted chili because Cincinnati chili is not like chili. It's just basically like meat soup or like really watery and stuff like that. But I would be interested. Yeah, if like I go to a 4th of July party and they have like chili as their specialty, I'm assuming it's good because that's a bold move to do on a 4th of July party.
Yeah, is that more like, because you're from the area, is that more like they usually at a Bengals game, they kind of do while they're doing the ads before they come back on the air type of thing. They show like pictures around the city, and usually almost without fail,
yep.
They show guys scooping chili. Is that mostly like a fall winter type of thing, and not so much like because in California I would think like summer chili cookout, like all that kind of stuff. Is it different in Cincinnati because chili's more of a cold weather seasonal food or something?
I guess in that sense, like people eat hot cocoa because it keeps them warm and stuff. And like if you're like scooping chili out of that in like a tailgate, I would assume it's like part of it's like holding it so your hands are warm and also tastes good, obviously. But yeah, it's like that watery, really It's essentially just like a really thick liquid, which I guess is soup, I guess. But it's not like the traditional chili that you would see in Texas, and then people outside of the state get triggered when they try to call that chili and stuff like that.
I see. Okay. Well, I got a lot to learn. Well, since just briefly, since the last time we had you on was before the draft, what did you make of the Bengals draft class? Some of their undrafted free agents, likes, dislikes, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I know that's quite a bit now in the rearview mirror, but you did quite a bit of work, film breakdown and such for the site, and I think all of us are pretty heavily invested in the draft who follow a football team. So what did you make of the Bengals haul, and good value, bad value, all that kind of good stuff?
It was a solid draft. I think a lot of my analysis of it kind of came off as negative at the time because I liked the Billy Price pick. It wasn't my preference, but I liked it. And I liked the Sam Hubbard pick, but I didn't love it and I didn't hate it. And it was a lot of this, it wasn't great value. It wasn't like reaching or anything. There were just a lot of solid picks. And for the most part, it kind of leaves you a little bit unamused, unexcited, because you're kind of wanting a little bit more, especially looking at some of the other drafts that teams do. But overall, just looking back, they got a lot of players that I think more than anything kind of fit the culture of where this team is right now. And I think an underrated value about rookies contributing early is getting them comfortable not only with the system, but with like the organization and the culture that surrounds them. And guys like Billy Price and Hubbard, who are obviously good locker room guys who are invested in not only the city, but presumably with the coaching staff and how they have that connection going on there. And just bringing in young guys who I think are going to contribute a lot in special teams, and that's how they're going to get on the field early. And yeah, they may not have the highest ceilings, which was kind of my biggest gripe with it. But I think for what the team needed, it was an okay draft. And at the end of the day, you can't really be too mad about that or too disappointed.
Yeah, and offensive line early. Billy Price wasn't my top guy at the center position, nor was he, the top offensive lineman for me really in the draft. But arguably the biggest position of need that they had on the board. They got one of the best centers, depending on your view of the big three guys that were there. And like you said, solid, not spectacular. I think last year's draft class was more of the wow, the John Ross speedster, the Joe Mixon guy. And yes, we understand there's a lot there with that guy, but Josh Malone, height, weight, speed guy, the sizzle was last year. This is more solidifying the trenches and doing some work on both sides of the ball. Now, you being from that area and, being a Bengals fan and following the team, you've probably noticed that there has been an absence of Ohio State players that they have picked, especially in recent years. Were you surprised that they took 2 Ohio State players in the first 3 rounds, and then they added the linebacker Worley as an undrafted free agent? So they really dipped heavily into the Buckeyes this year. Were you a little surprised by that, or hey, good players on a great team, let's get after them?
Basically, more the second, the latter of what you said. I don't think that teams specifically. Well, I mean, there's obviously the Ozzie Newsome connection with Alabama, and you can argue that there's a Georgia connection with like Cincinnati. But I think teams specifically focus more on targeting conferences and just Power 5 teams in general than rather targeting or staying away from teams. I think it was just a coincidence how the Bengals just didn't draft Ohio State players because, I mean, Ohio State has, produced tons of NFL talent, at least in recent years, and they just didn't really get the opportunity to draft any of them because either A, those players weren't on the board at the right time, or just B, they just had other guys higher. So this year just kind of all just came out at once. You got Price, Hubbard, and Worley, all guys who I think all 3 of them could very well make the roster. And I say that because of Worley, who may have an inside track as a linebacker. So I think it was just more of a coincidence, and I wasn't really on the opinion that they didn't like Ohio State guys. I just think that it just kind of happened, and they just kind of went with it.
This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're joined by special guest John Sheeran of Cincy Jungle and SB Nation. You can get this program on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, at cincyjungle.com. Subscribe to our channels. We appreciate it. And we know there's been some audio issues lately. We are working our best to get that cleaned up and figured out. We had it figured out, and then the bugs kind of came back the past couple of weeks. We're trying to get it figured out, so stick with us, subscribe to our channels, and we'll be good to you, I promise. We might be joined by my usual co-host, Scott Schulte, towards the end of the program. We will see, but we are happy to have John Sheeran with us once again. Speaking about kind of transitioning out of the draft and seeing these guys on the field a little bit, one guy that's been turning a lot of heads, John, is Auden Tate, the 7th-round pick, Florida State guy, huge, 230 plus pounds, 6'5", but he's a bit slow for a wide receiver, and he had injury issues. There was a lot of things that kind of caused him to drop a bit, but there's a lot to like there. Now, he has been turning heads probably the most in these early practices. Again, we're talking minimal pads and shorts, so kind of hard to take too much stock into it. But just real quick, unbelievable, quote unquote, AJ Green said of Tate's catches, according to Dan Horde of Bengals.com. They call him a young Brandon Marshall. He has unbelievable hands. That's kind of some quotes from AJ Green. Bob Bicknell, the new wide receivers coach, he's got a lot of things that you can't teach. Unbelievable size, good body control. are you buying the hype? I mean, I've got a couple of follow-up questions for you here, but I mean, are you buying the initial hype that you're seeing here? Because if I remember correctly, Kelvin Benjamin, wasn't he a Florida State guy? Big, tall, strong guy, not very fast. Is he closer to that? And Florida State likes those guys, apparently. Is he closer to that and just hasn't reached that potential as early as Benjamin did? Or is it just, you know what, he's going to really have trouble getting separation as a wide receiver in this league? I don't know. Just your initial impressions of him. You did some film work on him as well for Cincy Jungle.
Yeah. I just want to start by saying I didn't completely foreshadow this, but I did say that, like, as soon as Tate was drafted, I was like, he's going to do something ridiculous, whether it be training camp or like preseason, and people are going to go crazy, and then he's not going to catch a ball in the regular season, whether that because he doesn't make the roster or he just can't get on the field because he can't play special teams. In general, just for receivers in general, like, they don't have to be all around great athletes, which I think is a misconception, but they do have to be, athletic in at least one area. And Tate does not have any athleticism to his name. Now, I'm not saying that the 4.6, 840 is a problem. It's just that he's not explosive and he's not quick. And the Brandon Marshall comparison is interesting because, yeah, Marshall was big and he can outbody guys, but Marshall could also get yards after catch, whether it be breaking tackles or making guys miss for his size. Tate he could like shut off a tackle or two, but he's not going to move very well in space. So I think Tate's role is pretty clear, and that's going to be just contested catches down the sideline, get him in the red zone and see what he can do, because I think he's an ideal, not completely ideal, but typically the Bengals have targeted size at the position because they have a quarterback in Andy Dalton who's not completely precise with the ball, but he can put it in the area. And if you give him, a ton of guys like Marvin Jones and AJ Green, obviously, and Tyler Eifert, if you can just put the ball in the general area and you have a guy that has a big, large catch radius and go behind the shoulder or over a guy, that's very valuable to a quarterback like Dalton, who doesn't really throw guys open, I guess, necessarily, and needs guys to separate. So I think Tate, in that sense, kind of fits what they look for at the receiver position, but it all comes down to, okay, are they going to have an extra receiver on the roster, because they typically like to activate the final two guys on in that position group to play special teams, and you're not going to have Auden Tate be like a gunner on punt teams. They have like,
right.
They have like Malone and Core for that. So it's going to be a question of, did they maybe kick off Erickson for that because they need an extra spot, or are they going to have 7 receivers again? It's just going to be interesting how he continues developing in training camp and in the preseason, because if you can't run routes and separate in this league, you have a very small window of making a team and making an impact.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm looking at the receivers, obviously, and we know Green, Boyd, LaFell, Ross are locks. Probably either or, maybe both Core and Malone. And then you've got Erickson kind of hovering around there. Sometimes they've kept 5 receivers, sometimes they've kept 6. On the very rare occasion, they've kept 7. So it kind of depends what they want to do there. There's a lot of wild cards, obviously injuries and what they see in training camp. Maybe Tate turns into a guy like I'm blanking on his name right now. The big guy that was from the small school in Wisconsin, who was there. He had the long hair.
Touchdown Jesus.
Yeah,
I don't remember his name. He's Jim Ozarski's guy.
yeah, Touchdown Jesus. Yeah, who was everybody's darling.
Right.
And in camps, and then as preseason games came, not much there. And we've heard Marvin Lewis say that we've seen it on Hard Knocks, where he says, where you're going to make this team is in preseason games. Not really. Yeah, if you turn heads in training camp practice, of course that's going to be in your corner, but you got to do some things in these games when you get chances. So obviously that's going to be something that they look at with Auden Tate. But I have been kind of wondering, because of his 230-ish pound frame, 6'5", a little bit slow on the speed, could he fill some sort of weird niche, either as, hey, let's just get this guy in there, even if he plays 5 snaps. If we keep him on the regular roster, he plays 5 snaps a game in the goal line packages, the red zone packages. So, you throw one up to the pylon, he's going to out jump a defender and make the catch. he might be open because if Eifert's on the field, Green's on the field, that sort of scenario. So I want to ask you about that, but I also want to ask you, well, let's start there, and then I'll give you the other question there. So could he be, number one, make the roster as just simply a niche receiver this year to help out in the red zone?
I think he can. I think in order for him to actually make the roster, because I think, at least in their minds, they think that position that they have is stacked, whether or not that the talent that they have is proven or not. I think if he makes the roster, they would expect him to fulfill, a role behind AJ Green, if need be, behind John Ross. He would be expected to run the entire route tree and to play on any down in any scenario. But obviously, he specializes in outbodying guys, whether it's in breaking routes or just jump ball situations and stuff like that. So I think if he makes the team, they would, in their minds, have him do anything that a receiver would do. And something that's interesting is that they brought, specifically in this draft class, besides Tate, they brought in a lot of guys who I think they would feel comfortable playing special teams. So maybe that they don't have two receivers that are gunners and would just fulfill those roles to maybe like a Mark Walton or even a Quentin Flowers if he makes the team. So they can give him flexibility in that, where they would, not have him do that role. So they could maybe weasel his way onto the roster. But I think if he comes onto the roster, he would be expected to do most, if not all, the things that all the receivers are expected to do.
Okay, so then my follow-up question, and there, you mentioned expectations of what a wide receiver. I mean, like you said, in a Marvin Lewis team, either they're going to be either an excellent wide receiver, and that's basically it. They got to have kick return ability. They got to be able to do, punt coverages, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, tight ends, they obviously are pass catchers. They also help out in blocking. Auden Tate has borderline size of a tight. I mean, really, you talked about a little bit of a lack of an athleticism in certain areas of his game as a wide receiver. But you look at his size and his speed, he almost has the skill set of an athletic type of tight end, but doesn't have the blocking prowess. Mm-hmm. We've seen this team time and time again try and experiment with guys at different positions than what they played in college, trying to get cute and trying to find some sort of niche. It doesn't work out. But could Auden Tate be a guy they look at as a tight end, H-back type of guy that, yeah, he needs to refine his blocking, obviously. But like I said, maybe he's a red zone threat. Maybe he's a goal line threat. I don't know. Is that something you think is in the cards, or is that just pushing a boulder uphill at this point?
I would say it's in the cards, specifically because right after they drafted him, they said they would not try him at tight end. And I don't trust this team at all with what they say in those kinds of situations. So yes, yeah. I wouldn't say it's out of the question. I would say, though, that if he makes the roster, it is as a wide receiver.
Okay, Jake Kumerow is touchdown Jesus. That was the guy we could not remember. Good Lord, I can't believe I forgot about that.
Jake Kumerow, Ryan Whalen, like Kobe Hamilton. There's a bunch of Desmond Briscoe. There's a bunch of those guys. They all get mixed together. Yep,
and they didn't do very much for the Bengals, did they? Nope. So your prediction. Let's get this because I'm going to hold you to it. Your prediction for Auden Tate in terms of making the roster and potentially getting looks at tight end are?
I would say right now he doesn't make the roster.
Okay.
Right now.
Okay.
And if he does make the roster, it would be a wide receiver.
Right. Yeah. I'm kind of in agreement with you. I think he will really need to wow the coaches at this point, especially now that they're getting John Ross back. They seem to really like Malone and Core. I think there's a chance that they only keep one, but I think they really like both of them and want to see how they both develop. So, and I think they think that they could probably still develop Tate on the practice squad.
Oh, for sure.
And he probably wouldn't be someone that would be a hot commodity probably from another team's perspective, but we'll see. We'll see. Mm-hmm. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran from SB Nation and CincyJungle.com. Can't thank him enough for coming on in such short notice, and I appreciate it. As I said, we might be joined later on by Scott Schultze. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube. You can subscribe to all of those channels. You can also get all of our material on CincyJungle.com, and we appreciate all the support that you've shown us. Really, this program's now, gosh, I think we're 2 years old. Gosh, we might have to have like an anniversary party here. We're also going to be taking a couple of listener questions at the end of the show. So if you are joining us in the live YouTube chat, feel free to shoot those to us there. If you are following us on Twitter, and please do, at BengalsOBI, you can shoot a question to us over there. We are also scanning the comment threads at cincyjungle.com. There's a post up there, and you can also get in touch with us, be it with a listener question or any kind of feedback or anything via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Let's transition a little bit here, John, from what's been going on right now to what has transpired with this club over the past 15 years. And as you're a little bit younger than I am, so I think that you have I'm a little envious of you because you've seen far more high quality football than I have in times of following the Bengals. So I'm starting a series on cincyjungle.com. It's going to be the top 10 Bengals players under Marvin Lewis of all time. And the first post should probably be coming up sometime either tomorrow or over the weekend. So I'm not going to give my first, my top guys away, but obviously there are some names that we all can recognize as being some of the top guys. So there are a number of factors to consider. I mean, there are some great players that were great players in the NFL, but didn't play a long time under Lewis. Willie Anderson is one. Justin Smith is another. There are other factors, how many Pro Bowls a guy has been to, and are they, were they kind of an alternate that was brought into the fray or what have you? And then just general durability, maybe even likability. I hate to kind of say that, but production obviously is of paramount importance in this. So I think it's going to be a pretty entertaining series that I have. Each player is going to get their own post, and then we're going to do some honorable mentions. But just give me maybe some guys that here. Let's do this. Give me 2 or 3 names that you remember from either 2003 or they're on the current roster right now that you can say, hey, these are kind of the top players that Marvin Lewis has had on the Bengals in the past, 15 plus years.
So I'm not going to say Chad Johnson. I'm not going to say Carson because I think those guys are obvious. And I'm not going to say like Gino and AJ. I will start with Leon Hall, though, because I think he was one of my personal favorites because my cousin who worked at Kenwood Country Club, which is like a few miles up north of Cincinnati, he would get him sometimes and he would just say how cool of a person he was and how chill and laid back. But not only that, he was like Geno Atkins was the first, at least of like this generation of like undersized 3 techniques. And when the NFL was going more past like heavy, Leon Hall was like as the NFL started moving into more 11 personnel sets with like 3 receivers and defenses started using 3 cornerbacks on the field. He was the first like great slot cornerback, and he was criminally underrated at his peak of his career in Cincinnati because he didn't rack up a ton of interceptions and a ton of targets because he would be playing in the slot, and he would just completely shut down slot receivers, at the time where the NFL was transitioning to that sort of offense. And now in today's game, having a great slot cornerback is so imperative, and so many great defenses rely on having a guy that they can put in nickel. And I think Leon Hall, to me, was so valuable for that defense. And he spent a long time here. He was the one extended, not Jonathan Joseph. And he was just a great dude in general. And he's definitely the very least in my top 10.
Okay. So you're going to like one of my posts then, because I'm not going to say where he is, but I did put Leon Hall on the list. And I want to hear more and I like the fact, here's what I like about it. I mean, we could all say, like you said, we could say Chad, we could say AJ, we could say Gino, because those are kind of shoe-in type of guys. But I like those fringe type of guys, those guys that, or not necessarily fringe, guys like a Hall that they were great, but they weren't the perennial Pro Bowler. They were just really solid, good football players and played for the team for a long time. I'm going to throw a couple things out, just tidbits before we get to your next player that you want to talk about. Leon Hall, in terms of career leaders, I always thought this was pretty interesting. He is fourth in team history with 26 interceptions, behind Ken Riley, Lewis Breeden, and David Fulcher, all 3 very good defensive backs. This is an insane number to me, and I guess it has something to do with his longevity with the club. But he has a franchise record 112 passes defended with the team. The next highest is ironically Jonathan Joseph at 76. Adam Jones has 67. Reggie Nelson 62. So I mean that's to me that's a ridiculous number. And then you look at tackles, overall tackles. The top 7 guys, there's one nose tackle who has an insane number, 1,008 total tackles, Tim Crumry. I don't know if you remember that name. But then you've got all linebackers essentially, except for Darrell Williams, a safety, 500. But here at number 8, amidst all these other linebackers, is Leon Hall in terms of total tackles with the club. So to me, he was around the football a lot, whether it's tipping the passes away or knocking them away, intercepting them, or around a guy to make a tackle. He was also one of the very few rookies that Marvin Lewis instantly relied on to play a significant role with the team. He didn't even allow that with Jonathan Joseph, though Joseph had an injury, I think, in his rookie year too. But so that's why I like Hall on this list. There's just a number of different aspects that, that go so overlooked when you think about other players. The 3 we mentioned that would be shoo-ins on this list. Leon Hall gets lost in the shuffle, and obviously he was a big part of many outstanding Bengals defenses under Mike Zimmer and some under Paul Guenther as well. One last thing I just want to say about him. He was very durable with the exception of 2 Achilles injuries that he suffered. And to show his durability, the fact that he came back earlier than it's scheduled from both of those injuries and still played with the team, still produced, that to me said a lot about Leon Hall, both the character and the football player. So good choice on that. Who's another guy you got on your list there?
Now, I know you said that we want to stay away from players who spent a little time before Marvin got here, but I feel like just for the respect of this man, for the disrespect that was put upon him upon the Bengals top 50 last year, I have to say Brian Simmons' name. I know he started his career in the 90s, but he was one of the few guys that when I first started watching the Bengals was when Marvin came here. And that defense early on in his career, in his time here, was not very good, obviously. I mean, that 2005 team was heavily relied on their offense, and on defense, it was either turnover or bust. But Simmons was just he was just that staple on that defense, I feel like. And obviously, Takeo Spikes was here, and he was playing alongside with him. And when Spikes left, Simmons remained here, and he was kind of like a better version in my mind. From what I can remember, he was just like a better version of like Vinny Ray, and where he wasn't the biggest, wasn't the fastest, but he was productive. He played a lot, and I just feel like he's one of the most unheralded Bengals of all time, and he was like 48 or 47th on like that top 50 list last year, and I thought that was completely disrespectful to him. And I feel like on a bad defense, surrounded by not very good players around him, he performed about as well as he could have, and for a decent period of time. So he would be maybe not my top 10, but I feel like I have to give him an honorable mention.
That's a great call, because not only was he also very, very durable for the most part, never got into trouble, never did anything, just played solid football. And yes, he only played, I guess it was 4 seasons under Lewis, 03 through 06. And yes, some of his more productive years were with Spikes. Spikes, if you remember, was a free agent in the 2003 offseason when Marvin got there. Marvin tried to talk him into, hey, we'll give you the money, just stay and trust what I'm building here. And Spikes didn't want anything of it, and he went to, I believe it was Buffalo right after that. So that kind of an interesting thing there. The one thing about Brian Simmons that also should be mentioned with him, kind of in the same light with Leon Hall, is just a guy who did whatever was asked of him. He played multiple linebacker positions and you didn't see a drop off really at any different position that he played. And when Marvin Lewis had, Nate Webster, who ended up being a turd of a human being, when he went down with an injury, Simmons had to help out in the middle of the field. So he just did a lot of things for this team and did them pretty well. So that's a good point. I like that one. Who else you got?
Maybe I could throw out Kevin Huber just because he's a Bearcat, and
All right.
I'm obviously loyal to Bearcats, but I'll throw out Bobby Williams just because he was.
I love that one. Yep.
Just as a young kid, he was that big offensive lineman. He'd come out of the tunnel going like this, and that was always a big part of my memories going to games. Down in training camp, he was one of the most lovable guys, just interacting with other guys and doing autographs and stuff. Just big Bobby Williams. I want to say he was undrafted, if I remember correctly, but he was either undrafted or like drafted kind of late. But he was always solid, playing next to Willie on the right side, and he played here a long time too. So he was just one of my favorite players as a kid, and I would say underrated as well.
Yeah, so I see. I love that one too, and I mean, you got to love the big boys. I think he was probably 330. That was a big man, and he was. You know what? That was during that time when that line. He came in. I believe it was they got him the 04 free agency period. And Marvin Lewis' second year, and he was a really good get for them. One of the more higher profile guys that Marvin Lewis has signed in his watch, and he stayed with the club for a number of years. And that line with him, and he was next to Willie Anderson at right tackle. You had Richie Bram for a little bit of that time at center, and then Steinbach for a little bit of that time at left guard. Then you had Levi. I mean, that line was a great line, and Bobby Williams was definitely a very good player, and one that I think deserves a lot of praise. I want to give a little bit of a shout out to a couple of guys that I didn't put them on the list, but they were also relatively big free agency / trade acquisitions and played pretty well under Lewis. And again, kind of like what you mentioned, John, they were part of the defense that was, hey, we got to get a turnover, otherwise they're probably getting points. So, and the cornerback duo of Torrey James and Delth O'Neal. Torrey James was another one that came over. I think he was an 03 signing from the Raiders. It ended up being a pretty decent corner for them. Delth O'Neal was a trade guy that they got in 04 and ended up playing for the team for a handful of years and was pretty productive as well. Yes, they got burned a few times. Yes, they let up some points and all of that, but they also created a ton of turnovers, which immensely helped a young Carson Palmer, especially in that 05 campaign when I think they had 4 games that year where they had 5 interceptions in a game, which created short field for a young quarterback. And obviously Palmer being who he was, tore him apart. So I think those two guys, I don't know how vivid your memory is of them. Again, they were on bad defenses, but two guys that were outside acquisitions that I thought were pretty good.
Delth O'Neal was definitely a favorite of mine growing up, and just playing Madden, I would always get like a pick a game with him.
Yeah, you had to have him return kicks, probably, right? I mean, he was in Madden. He was an insane kick returner. And then there's other guys too. Reggie Nelson has to be in the discussion. Adam Jones might even be in the discussion, depending on what your thoughts are on him. But I think you and I are kind of on the same page here. I do like the Bobby Williams edition. I think that's a really solid one. Who are some of your best players in the Marvin Lewis era? I saw a couple of comments. Obviously, so Rick Reed said Gino, meaning Atkins, number 1. Lucas Leonard said Carson Daly. I think he's got the wrong last name, but I think we know who he meant. Michael Myers says, "How about Reggie Nelson?" So there's a number of different players there that we could go with. So this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to get out of here in just a few minutes. I am joined by John Sheeran of Cincy Jungle and SB Nation. Thanks for his generosity of his time. We're going to get a couple of listener questions here. I think we got a couple in the YouTube chat, and then we will get out of here. I saw one earlier. Jesse Bates playing 16 games this year. John, what do you think? It's from Terrell Howell in the YouTube chat.
I think that's a safe bet. I wouldn't say 16 starts necessarily, unless one of the 2 starters gets injured. But I think Bates is going to contribute from day one if everything goes to goes to plan, and he'll be out there all year long. Now, how many starts he gets, how many snaps he gets, is up for question. But 16 games appeared in, yes, I would say that's safe.
Okay, so you watch a lot of film on these guys. You have undoubtedly watched at least some film on Jesse Bates. Is he the best safety on the Bengals roster right now?
That's tough. No, because I think that's a tiny bit outlandish. But I would say that, I mean, he was the highest drafted safety on the roster,
Right.
so he has like more, like he's got like raw talent to him, and he can do, and he has range and deep field ability that Iloka and Williams doesn't have. I want to see it first before I would say that statement, but raw talent at 21 years old, I would say, in relative to like where Iloka and Williams were starting out, yeah, if you put it that way, yeah, I would say.
Yeah, so not now, but definitely could be in the near future. Yeah, I've got high hopes for the guy. To be honest, I wasn't too familiar with him. Really, I think you mentioned him as one of the possibilities when you came on the program before the draft as a guy that the Bengals might be looking at. And I think Dave Lapham also shortly before the draft saying, this is a guy to keep an eye on day 2. And lo and behold, they take him. And when you see some of his plays, he's got athleticism. He's not the hardest hitter as Sean Williams and Iloka have proven to be, but he sure can turn the ball over, and that's something the Bengals need. So I think if he's healthy, he'll play all 16 games, and I think someone else kind of to make a point with one of our other folks in the YouTube chat. Someone else mentioned in our last segment about great players under Marvin Lewis, and Chris Crocker was mentioned. I don't know if he was a great player, but he filled that slot swingman type of thing, and maybe that's where the reason I bring that up is maybe that's where Jesse Bates starts as a slot, swingman type of guy, and that's how he plays a bunch of games. I don't know if you think that that's a possibility or not, but that's maybe where I see his initial role at least. Right?
For sure.
Yeah. All right, one more before we get out of here. It was let's see who it was. Dean Burke, who was most likely to start on the right side of the offensive line. Obviously, this is probably the most intriguing battle of Bengals training camp is who's going to play right guard and who's going to play right tackle. I think most people right now would say inside track at right tackle is probably Jake Fisher, but that's I don't know. This almost seems to be a weekly question, but it's still worthwhile, especially since you haven't been on the show for a little bit, John. I don't know, man. What do you think about guard? I mean, or is it maybe a late release? One of the final cuts. There's a guy that's surprisingly released. The Bengals maybe make a move and bring him in. I don't know.
I think it's this group. I would venture to say it could be a guy coming off the streets, but if that's the case, then I would assume maybe an injury occurred at the right guard or right tackle. Here's what I'll say. I've got pretty good experience answering this question at this point. Whoever starts at right guard. I've been rehearsed in this area. I'm comfortable at least July 5th saying that whoever starts at right guard, I would say earned it in the sense that they would feel comfortable, and I would feel comfortable because Westerman has talent. I think Hopkins started coming along towards the end of the year where he's going to be a good position to reclaim that spot. I'm not so sure about Redmond. I think it's more of a 1A, 1B situation than a 3-way battle. But whoever wins the battle between Hopkins and Westerman, I would feel modestly comfortable that they're going to produce an average season, which is really like, we're not expecting them to be, good players or great players even. Just to stay out there, have the level of play, not, go too high or too low. Just be a good body, I guess. Right tackle, I wouldn't say the same thing. I think if Bobby Hart's out there, something bad happened with Fisher. And honestly, I don't have a lot of faith that Bobby Hart can be a good NFL tackle at this point. I think he was always destined to be a guard. And then the Giants had to try him at a tackle, and he failed miserably. And I think Fisher's clearly the more talented player. I don't think it's close in that sense. I think they're preparing Hart to at least compete with Boye as the swing guy, and he either wins that or he's ultimately cut. Regardless, Fisher's the clearly better talent there, and if he stays healthy under Pollock's tutelage, I have pretty good confidence that he's going to produce a decent season at right tackle.
Yeah, it's interesting about Hart. He is listed, at least last I checked, he was listed on the Bengals website as a guard/tackle. So it's interesting to see, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of snaps he gets in the preseason and how that affects his roster status. How confident are you, and how believable do you find the good stuff coming out of mini camps about Abuehi, the improvements that's seen under Frank Pollock? He seems like a little bit of a different player. Maybe he realizes that he's not getting that fifth-year option and he's playing for some possible decent money. Do you find that believable, or have we seen who he is, and that's no matter who's coaching him? I am what I am, as Popeye would say, I guess.
I'm always of the opinion that players don't change. If good players become better, bad players just stay bad. But I will say this: Abuehi under Alexander was not a good fit in the sense where Alexander's techniques with pass protection, it's a lot of hug techniques and not a lot of punching. And it's kind of the opposite for Frank Pollock, was more of an aggressive style of philosophy. Abuehi's main strengths are, first of all, his feet and his length. And when he was punching at left tackle, he would do a decent job, but there's still not a lot of power to him. There's still not a lot of functional strength, kind of pretty important needs as a left tackle. So I think as a player, we've seen who he is, but Pollock, I think, can get out to him to be a lesser version of what Anthony Collins was. Some guy who you could just survive with, but just as a swing tackle and not as like a full-time starter. Yeah. You wouldn't want him out there for 50, 60 snaps a game. So in that sense, I think he's going to do okay in that role as long as we don't see him too much. But regardless, at this point, it's just hard for me to expect him to turn into a player that was worth drafting in the first round, because that's in my perspective, that's the only way that they can get, that they can see that pick as a success. Obviously, not just like a career backup, but just as someone who's worth a first round pick. And I don't think we're ever going to see that from Abuehi.
Yeah, and I got a couple of little sidebar questions for you. Do you see Abuehi being an effective player maybe this year, as we've seen the Bengals? Now, granted, this was under Paul Alexander, but they have used a sixth offensive lineman, kind of the jumbo tackle, extra tackle. Abuehi did it as a rookie when he finally came back from his injury, just to get some snaps and some experience. Do you see that may be something that they use him in this year, or is that not really part of Pollock's scheme?
I would have to look back at some Dallas film to see if they utilize six offensive linemen, because I'm not 100% confident in answering that question. But as a six offensive lineman, like Abuehi would be fine, just because that sixth guy is mainly used to just combo block like the force player on the edge. And and when you're not giving Abuehi like a one-on-one where he has to completely seal a guy out of a gap, he can do fine. Like that's just something any NFL tackle could do. And then you factor in Abuehi's got athleticism. If Pollock can, maybe hammer in some points about angles in terms of zone blocking, you can get a solid role player out of that role. Like Dennis Rowland was always like that guy back in the day, and he was just like maul guys over because he was so big. That's not really Abuehi's game, but for a lack of power, you can instill an understanding of angles and just leverage and that stuff. And if Pollock can get that under, in Abuehi's mind in the next coming months, he can get a decent player for that small role.
Yeah. Last question, I guess, and then we'll get out of here. Again, it's kind of a sidebar to the initial question posted by the fan there. Are you pretty confident that Billy Price is a Frank Pollock guy? Because there was talk that, hey, Ragnow was maybe the guy that they wanted all along, and they settled for Price. I mean, are you pretty confident that that's still a guy or the guy that Frank Pollock wanted and can do well in his scheme?
From what I've heard of just about like that whole situation, I don't think that they feel like they settled for Price. Now that conversation might have been different for like Bodine, 4 years ago, but I don't think they settled, I guess, quote unquote, for Price. I think he was always a guy that not only just Pollock, but just like the entire coaching staff just fell in love with upon meeting and just wanted to bring him in as soon as possible. And I think, labeling guys as like, this coach is like a kind of guy is always kind of dangerous, because it can lead to some bad things, whatnot. But I think Price is going to fit in fine, at least under Pollock in terms of just like the culture and stuff like that. And he'll be a solid player. And I think one thing that Pollock's good at is that he's good at, getting the absolute most out of the guys that he develops. And I don't think that'll be a problem for Price.
Guy's got the biggest baby face I've ever seen. He's just this gigantic guy.
Imagine if he grew a beard, though.
Yeah, that would be funny. He's got like this 12-year-old kid face on this like gigantic body. It's a weird.
That would complete the Whitworth transformation. Always
Yeah.
mini Whitworth.
Yeah.
If you can grow a beard, that would do it.
Yeah, and they've got the the shaved dome. So yeah, that makes sense. John, thanks so much for jumping on with us. Thanks so much for your time. I hope we make this somewhat regular where you can come on to this program. Where can fans find your stuff, get in touch with you? Obviously, aside from love having you on this show, part of the reason why we do is because of the positive feedback that you get from your great film breakdowns and everything on Cincy Jungle. But tell us, where we can find your stuff and all that good stuff.
I'm mainly just on Twitter, being an idiot at John__Sheeran. That's where you can find. Oh, and also the YouTube channel D&H Sports. I do that with former Cincy Jungle writer Daddy-O McDuck, and we're on a little hiatus because he had some work to do, but we should be back in full force when training camp starts. And along with being on the show, I hope to be on the show in the future, and you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, tell Daddy-O what's up. We miss him, but
sure.
Yeah, tell him what's up. He's a good dude. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Again, you can get this program on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and CincyJungle.com. You can get in touch with us via Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email theobinsider@gmail.com. For John Sheeran, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks so much for listening to our program. We will continue to bring you all kinds of coverage throughout the summer here. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. We'll talk to you soon.